So I want to switch a little bit to this other idea while we have a little bit more time, because I think that the other thing that dovetails in with the quasi-religion idea, or the believing in the, and by the way, people can probably tell we're kind of biased towards talking about progressives and liberals and gun control. That's really where we need to address the major issues. There's issues in the other places as well, but we're really kind of dealing with that, with this idea. So the thing that dovetails into the quasi-religion idea is this idea that I've been calling the Prometheus of certainty, which is another myth. And so society has a general insecurity. Humans seem to have a general insecurity. I don't think that's arguable. I think most people who are in the psychological professions would say that's true, from the evolutionary psychologists to the contemporary psychologists. Humans have insecurities and they live in groups. We live in groups. We like to try to quell our insecurities, so we're not afraid every day to the point where we're paralyzed, and we want to work and do good things by our family and friends and kith and kin, and that's how we roll. But we do have insecurity. And because we have insecurity, we see comfort. You brought that up earlier. We're comfort-seeking people. And I do think a lot of the belief by what I call lib-progs in this over-belief in the power of law and policy and government has to do with being able to go home at the end of the night and be able to sleep, right? Because if you really had to look at the problems of the world and you really had to see that they're not going to get solved unless you get up off of the couch, that doesn't really help your insecurity. It doesn't really help with your comfort. So the Prometheus of certainty is something that I think all power clusters and all human hierarchies they're foisted into that position. I don't know whether it's a chicken or the egg. I don't know. Is it insecurity that makes it happen? Is it we're insecure and it also happens? But governments and the heads of state and elders and kings and queens fall into this place where it's very important or effective for them to advertise themselves as the deliverer of certainty, the light of certainty, the light of stability, right? The government is here to solve the problems, to protect the borders, right? And I think part of that, like all myths, is genuine and legitimate. Somebody could argue against that. But again, there seems to be an overselling of it that betrays the actual nature of reality, which is you can't have control of it all. You cannot control all of the negatives for people. You simply can't be a bulwark against the negatives of existence for an entire society. And I know in one way, people will say, well, we're not saying that at all. But in another way, if you listen to the fucking subtext, that is what governments are selling. That is what the Democrats are selling. And it is what liberals and progressives are desiring. They want the government and Silicon Valley and Google and Apple and the company they work for and the township that they live in. They want all of that to prepare existence and causality in a way that everything's a nicely manicured college campus. There's no bullshit. All of the chaos is taken care of, and we can just go home and be okay.
And it's such a well understood principle, which is why it seems ludicrous that we'd have to really talk about it, because it's built into our most basic fiction. I mean, look at the movies. What do the governments say? Oh, if we let this out, everybody's going to go crazy. Panic and comfort are the two tools with which all of our comic book villains are trying to run things from the shadows, right? Create the panic, fix the panic.
Sure.
Keep them from panicking, take the pandemic. How many times did we hear discussions about, well, what information can we give people because of the way they will react to the information?
Yeah.
We've got policymakers whose primary job is make us feel like things are going well. And this is why when Democrats are in office, Republicans are saying the sky is falling. And when Republicans are in office, Democrats are saying the sky is falling, right? Because if everything is going well, people are going to lean back and they're going to say, this is on autopilot. This is fine. I like this.
Yeah.
But we recognize it in our opponents. We recognize it every time our opponents do it, but we don't recognize it in ourselves.
Sure.
And we have to recognize it in ourselves when we're pitching the idea for the new law. Well, all we've got to do is have the new law. We can relax. We can have a bowl of Wheaties, go to work, come home, watch TV, and go to bed.
Yeah. Yeah. The very idea that a parental entity, collective parental entity, can take away the nastiness of life, right? We can extend it. I think part of this is connected in the West to our ongoing relationship with religion. There's, I have a number of friends that are religious and from varying different places and different intensities. And there are different manifestations of how people relate to their religion and their God. And generally, I find that when people are less sophisticated in their religion, they believe more in the paternalistic, I'll be taken care of to a degree that betrays reality type belief. And then there's the more sophisticated religious people who don't go that far, who say there's a parental element to it, but that element is not ever going to shield you. You got to put it on your shoulders too. And even if with the shield and you have it well on your shoulders, you still might eat shit because that's what's up, right?
There are numerous academics, scholars who talk about the dangers of that paternal element, right? Take Francis Paul Prucha, who was an amazing authority on the relationship between the Native Americans and the United States government. And if there's one takeaway from most of his work, it's that the paternalism was probably the most detrimental type of policy background that was enforced or that was used to just absolutely demolish the holdings of the Indian tribes, Native American tribes in the United States. And that paternalistic relationship has actually led to, just the concept of paternalism. It's a nasty word.
Yeah.
You think of a paternal instinct, I'm being fatherly. You don't think of that as negative, but when we talk about it from a policy standpoint, this is paternalistic. We hear that and we hear the negative because we can understand the negatives associated with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And sorry, did you want to continue?
No.
So the Prometheus of certainty is about this projection. So it's a symbiotic relationship between the need of the government and the need of the people to have that to believe in or to project, right? And I'm very much so now getting into how much of life is in the invisible to most people. Because, it depends on who you talk to. 1% to 2% of what goes on in our brains we're able to be conscious of.
Right.
Maximum. So a lot of the stuff that we're involved in collectively or individually is invisible to us. We're being pushed by our own subconscious forces, right? And so that's the same thing happens as a collective. And so we might not realize how much this society and the Western milieu is driven by this desire to have your government be a bulwark against the uncertainties of life. And as you just said, it's extraordinarily dangerous to believe that. It is so far out of what's actually real, right? You just simply, causality, you just simply cannot remove yourself from it. You can't shield yourself from it. You can do a lot to make sure that your life isn't a fucking nightmare, but you simply can't shield yourself from it. And neither can your friends and your family and your church, and neither can your government, especially your government through policy, because we just spent over an hour talking about the main weapon of the government is policy and potential deterrence. And it simply isn't even, it's like a crapshoot in many ways, whether or not deterrence can do something. So you have the myth of deterrence, and then you have the Prometheus of certainty. And these two things, my job is to figure out what works for gun rights and what works for mitigating firearms related injury and death. And I assure people that after years of studying this, believing in the government as the Prometheus of certainty and believing in the myth of maximum deterrence, these are not the fucking things that you engage in order to get better results with gun rights or firearms related negatives. Neither of them. Yet they are principal and fundamental to how it is that we live. So we're up against it, Hunter. Like that, like, it's a big deal, right? But at least, and other people have said this in other ways. I'm just taking the work of other people and, like, sifting it in the gold miner's pan. It was already there, right? But none of this stuff, while these fucking myths go on, I don't see how it is that it's one person at a time. Go ahead.
Well, and the funny thing is, it's not just that the information's there, right? It's that it's not even really subject to dispute anymore, or at least not subject to serious dispute. Its implications for one policy or another, yeah, that's subject to dispute. But there's nobody out there who's saying in any serious way, no, actually, studies show that general deterrence is perfect. There's nobody saying that.
Yeah.
So the idea that people still think in that regard, it's kind of wild. And a lot like implicit bias, the primary method of dealing with that problem is just providing the information.
Yeah.
And what we need to do is provide it in such a way where we juxtapose it with the issue where it's cropping up. And that's, in our context, the context of the gun rights debate.
Yeah.
When you talk about laws, you have to understand the inherent limitedness of general deterrence, and to a different extent, the limited nature of specific deterrence. You can still have the debate. You can still talk about which laws work and which laws don't, but you become somebody who's now trying to craft a solution that works as opposed to a solution that makes you feel good. Yes. And that's where you have to start, is with that information.
Yeah. And our system seems to be set up to make that like a fucking impossible. I don't want to say the word, but close to it, which is why my hypothesis is move liberal gun owners 501c4 to the proper ground. Move it away from it. Move it where the ground is that we would need to be, and do everything we can from that ground and attract people to that ground, and see, after a long period of time, it might not be a matter of how many people we have, but the kinds of people that we have that we can leverage. Because I think that leverage is going to be important, not just for guns, but for all things. I think we can be an example of a collective that does something unprecedented in this regard relative to mythologies and dogma and what's happening with the human mind now in society, because I think we have many problems that we're looking at that are wicked and sophisticated, and society's maladapted to deal with them from the current position. I don't think we're going to solve everything with guns, but we're on our way to creating a brain that's the kind of brain that society needs moving forward. Hopefully other people might emulate it. But I just can't think of two things that are more illiberal than jerking people around with misinformation and choosing, I don't know, choosing groupthink is the other one. Jerking people around with misinformation and just surrendering to groupthink. These principally illiberal, yet it seems to be par for the course now for librogs. So we've done a good treatment here. This is amazing shit. I hope other people can realize it. I have so many things now that I'm in the law pillar. I could do this once a week with you. And I think, whenever I'm going to try to, if I could get as much shit in the can with you as I can. But do you have any other things that you want to bring up today, briefly, based upon what we talked about?
I would encourage people to just Google limits of deterrence. If you're listening to this podcast, you don't have to go look at exactly what we've looked at. You'll find stuff out there because it, like you said, it's there. It's already there.
Yeah.
And you can find it, and it's not difficult to find.
Yeah. And if people don't want to go too crazy because you don't have a lot of time, here's the thing. I'm going to try to get at least the first section of the law pillar up by the end of the year, because this thing's turning into a whale, and I'm fine with that. It's going to be well over 200 pages. The first section is going to be a lot of this stuff that we're talking about. The second section will be the meat and potatoes shit, the Second Amendment, the natural law tradition, the National Firearms Act, the Heller, McDonald, like all that jazz, Bruin, all that jazz. We'll get down, and I'll also explain liberal gun owners' positions on types of regulations and certain regulations, and there's going to be that too. But at first, there's going to be addressing these fundamental issues, these fundamental overdeterminations and mythologies. People can wait, till the end of the year if they want, or do what Hunter said, Google it. Or the other thing is, I'm going to say right now, I am using GPT-4 for the law pillar, but only for sources and quotes. I'm not using it to write anything, and I don't suggest that any writers out there let GPT-4 write your shit for you. You're going to screw over your art, right? Don't do it. But it's the best search engine. It is so fast. It's sick, and it's helping me a lot. But I'm just saying, put a limit on it. You can use GPT-4, and it will probably deliver things faster to you, even the free version. But also, in light of that, I did not read. See, this is why I scrolled down, because I always F his name up. Raymond Paternoster. So Paternoster's work as a criminologist, he is the guy who critiques deterrence the most. I think he seems to be the founding father of pointing out the limits of deterrence. So Raymond Paternoster, Paternoster. Just go straight to Raymond Paternoster's work, and that will be more than enough for people that want to understand the limits of deterrence. Anything else, Hunter?
If you're looking at a career in law, there's a couple different ways you can do the criminology. You can be somebody who talks about it from kind of an academic perspective, or you can go the JD, right? You're going to become an attorney. You're going to practice this area of law. What you'll find is that this is 101 stuff. This is first chapter of your criminal law textbook, but it's not solved in the practice of law. The practice of law takes place within the system as it's conceived.
Yeah.
Right. So you're not going to really see lawyers in the process of changing anything in this regard. And when you're thinking, let's rely on the experts, who writes laws, who knows how laws work, those are all the attorneys, but they're going to work within that system. Right. And so you're not going to be able to rely on those experts. So this is something that we've all got to do. Every person has to know this, has to understand it, the limits of deterrence and what that means for major policy discussions.
Yeah, and this is a perfect time in society for people to start making the choice and realize that we're all powerful. Not all powerful as like all day. We're all powerful, but every one of us has power. and we're going to need to raise the level up from outside of officialdom. This is like we are legitimately in the beginning of a dark age. That's my opinion. And so I'm not sure about the first dark age 1.0, right? But we're in dark age. Well, there are probably many more, but the one we all know about, the dark ages, the dark age 1.0. We're in a dark age 2.0. And this dark age has a lot of truth and light inside of it. That's part of the trickiness of it. It's not absolute dark. We have access to all the information. So the light is in there, but yet it is dark. Maybe not quite as dark as hundreds of years ago, but it's dark. And I don't see, and officialdom is perpetuating it. So I don't see how we get another age of enlightenment here unless it's the people that lift the level up and start making determinations. I'm not going to buy into the bullshit. I'm not going to just be on the internet all the time, running my suck and looking for all of the news sources that reinforce the way I'm thinking. And I'm never going to investigate my own thoughts. And I'm always just going to spend my time blaming the other side for being ignorant and never look at how I'm being ignorant. Right. So I think people need to realize we do have the power to lift this thing up. And again, to break away from the Prometheus of certainty thing, to break away from the paternalistic thing, to break away from needing officialdom to constantly fucking do every single thing for us. Even though they don't, we kind of perceive it, right? So that's what I would like to encourage people to do.
It's a big ask, but it's not impossible.
No, and I know hardly anybody's going to do it. But you know what? A couple people will. One person, like every year, I get another few people that can beat the fucking world with their brains. And like you, like Hunter, like David, like Pincus, like Curtis Marion, like John Van Driel. Every year I get one or two more that's like, let's do this. And I don't think it's going to be an issue where the masses wake up. I think it's going to be an issue where it's a small group of people that create an avalanche eventually. That's what I'm seeing. And as hard as it is, it just keeps happening. And these discussions are how we do that.